Hello, I'm Sally Pointer. Today I'm sorting out some of my Cordage, Fibre and prehistoric sewing supplies, and those of you who are interested in such things might like to have a look as I rummage through and see what we've got in there. There is no doubt that mess is my middle name, but even I get to a point where I've got to do something about it. So this morning I'm going to tidy up this little lot. This all gets used when I'm doing prehistoric textile teaching and making replicas, and there's odds and ends in there that I really need to find for projects for my university masters at the moment, and I thought maybe it would be quite interesting to talk you through some of the things that are in there as they end up back in the right places. So there's a few things there that I can just put away. So this, for example, is a big wodge of raffia, which isn't terribly good for European prehistory, but is a very good stand-in for limebast. When I'm teaching, I quite often give people a go with the raffia first before they get onto the limebast. So that just needs tidying. What else have we got down here? That little lot are different fibre samples. They need sorting out. There's various projects that are finished or part finished. That's usually my sewing basket, but it looks like it's got a bit jumbled, so we'll sort that out. I think I need to spread this all out, give it a tidy, and we'll see what we've got. So let's start with the big stuff first. So this is a big basket of limebast. Now the basket itself is a really nice coil work one, which I think probably came from Africa originally. But it's a beautiful thing, and it's really good for holding a huge amount of bast. Now, you know, I could tidy that into little hanks, but it's not really worth the effort, 'cause I'll just untangle it when I come to use it. So that's staying as a heap. So I think the raffia can stand on top of that. And then on top of that can go this, which is a hide basket. So if I sort of flip that over, that's a really scrappy old leather hide that was sewn down onto a wooden frame. It does have handles. It does work as a bucket to an extent, but I tend to use it more as a basket. So if I put the decent limebast on top of that and tidy that up a bit, well, that will be quite sensible, particularly if I put a cloth over it to keep the light. Do you see the cat in the background then? Daft animal. Little deer hide over the top, that'll keep the light off it, but also it's somewhere squashy. I expect that orange cat of mine will be asleep on that before the end of the video. Next up is this chaotic mess. Now, there's an awful lot of stuff in here that shouldn't be there. We'll go through those in more detail in a bit, but what I'm trying to do is get down to the layers where it's really just raw materials, and that's heading there. So I'm going to give that a straighten up, because one-handed I can't deal with that. That's flax. And oh look, there's comb hiding in there, and we'll have a little look at which raw materials I've got lurking in this basket. Oh, what did I say? There's a cat in residence already. Are you okay there, Tesla? That doesn't look as if it's very stable. Yeah? You going to be okay? Well, if you fall off, you're tidying it up again. So that's the basket empty. Now the basket itself is seagrass, and it's a twined basket. It's looking a bit sad these days. Sadly not one that I made. I think this one might actually have come from somewhere like IKEA, but it's big and it's really good for these raw materials, and these are all things that I use for cordage and for small baskets and for things like twining and braiding. So we've got a big hank here of spliced hemp, which came from, where did that come from? I think that came from somewhere like Nepal. It's really, really nice stuff, and it's quite a good stand-in for prehistoric twine if I need a bit, but I want to make it myself. So tucked around that, we are going to put, that's flax, and that's raw hemp. They work up very, very similarly. Slight difference in colour, but largely you wouldn't tell the difference in immediate comparisons. Now the next thing to go in is, well, actually there's some rushes in there, a little mat that I made on my master's course. That's out of English bulrush, and there's a little bundle there of hard rush, which is quite useful as a demonstration. So nettles are going in next. This is some of last year's nettle harvest. And you can see this is quite coarse because it's not been processed yet. It was just peeled off the stalk and dried. And that will get rubbed and softened when I'm ready to use it. Now I use a lot of rubbed nettle. That's a bit that's in progress. And I'm going to be doing something for my masters with that. So I'm going to keep that bit out because I need to process that a little bit further before we can splice it up. This bit of nettle is really coarse. Can you see? All those things that look a bit like wood shavings in there are bits of the inner pith that really weren't peeled off very well. This is 3 or 4 years old now, this bundle. It's still useful though. I can use that as the core in basketry. Nothing goes to waste. A bit more processing, that will be okay. So that can go in next to the other nettle. All right, now, not everything that goes in here is vegetable in origin. Let me just move these. So I've got a hank of horsehair that was very kindly given to me by a friend. The horse wasn't at all hurt, it was just having a haircut. That's really nice for quite interesting types of cordage and braiding. And this is cattle hair. Now, it's not quite long enough for white horse hill bracelets, I don't think, but it's still a really useful and interesting material to have in there. And then we've got a piece of backstrap sinew. This is from a large animal like an elk. I'll usually tuck that along an edge so I can get to it. And as a comparison, I usually keep in there leg sinew. This is an ankle tendon from a red deer, which can also be beaten into collagen fibres and used to make cordage and for sewing. Okay, how are we doing so far? Not too badly. Now the next one looks a bit unpromising at first, partly because this could do with damping and rewinding, but this is bramble bast. So this came off the sort of blackberry vines that you get blackberries off in the autumn, and it was harvested in the early summer last year. And although you can probably hear how dry and scrunchy it is now, all that needs is very lightly dunking in water and it will become soft and strong and flexible and really good for binding coil baskets. So that can go down the middle. It's looking better, isn't it? What else have I got to go in here? Aha. So this is one that I like to teach with. This is horseradish fibre. Horseradish is really easy to harvest, but can you see how coarse the fibres are? It does mean you get a very good yield for not a lot of effort, and its very pale colouring makes it a nice contrast to these other materials. Tuck that down the edge. Then there's more of these somewhere, but there's a handful of nice long pine needles for pine needle baskets. We'll tuck that in. There's more of this one too. This is elm bark. Now, we don't get a lot of elms in this country anymore. We had a Dutch elm disease a couple of generations ago, but you know, they are still around, and the bark is really rather lovely to work with. I don't have enough bark in this basket really, so I'm hoping this year to build up my collection of bark samples, but I can tuck in there next to the nettle. What was that? Oh, that's more cow hair, different colour of cow hair. What else have we got? And the only one that I'd actually bothered labelling last year, that's burdock stalk. So burdock, I've used that in other videos as basketry elements. So lots and lots of different textures. But that, when I've had a little bit more of a tidy up and straighten it, at least I can see what's where in it. And when I'm teaching and doing hands-on sort of public interaction stuff, this is brilliant for letting people having a rummage through, so we can talk about different materials, colours, textures, different uses, and there's never enough in it. I can always add more to it. Let's have some of the partly finished things next. Okay, so we have got a couple of braided belts in progress here. These are very simple finger woven belts, and they can go into a little English bulrush basket. That will stop them getting tangled. This one's been worked onto a little bone loop at the end, which is, there you are, focus, always quite a nice little detail. These don't need a lot more doing to them. It's just useful to have one started that I can pick up at an event and just finish off. So those will tuck in there. What else is partly finished that can go in there? Now that is a little simple looping net or bag. So in my other videos you'll have seen this one before. This is a hairnet that I wear quite often, made in flax. And that's one in progress. It's got a little bone needle wedged in with it. So that can scrunch up and go in there. Remember I was talking a second ago about the really scrappy nettle. That's a little coil basket in progress with that really, really scruffy, poorly prepared nettle as the core, just twisted, and a little bit of lime bast to sew it down. So that's in progress. That can just sit in there somewhere. Actually, it might make a bit of a lid for that. It was good to have a stopper for things. That's a little lime bast knife sheath based on the one that Ertzi had with him. I do need to find a knife to go in it. That one's far too big. Yes, much smaller one to go in there. So that needs to go into my outfit because I wear that quite a lot. That one is a sprang hairnet, really ought to go in with my Bronze Age stuff. That one is a little dogtooth adorned bag that was woven on a backstrap loom. That's in linen with a little bit of very subtle coloration in it, because one of the interesting debates is at what point does colour start being introduced to prehistoric textiles. That one was actually woven by visitors to an event I did at Stonehenge some years ago, so there's lots of different hands had a go at this, and we put some beads in because we were exploring whether beads could be woven in quite easily. I'm not quite sure what that's going to be. It's not quite long enough for a belt. It'll probably end up being a bag strap at some point. So those are a bit better. I'll just fold those up nicely, and I'm hoping that they can go into a corner of my sewing basket when I finish sorting that out. Okay, almost there. Let's move on to the sewing basket. So this is rather a nice thing. It's mostly made out of unpeeled willow. I think that might be something like clematis vine along the top. And because of all the small things that go into it, I usually line this one with a bit of leather. So the first thing that can go in is that little tub of part-made projects. They're to hand that way, but they don't escape all over the place. I think the next thing in should probably be needles and pins and scissors. So, where did I get stuck? So my needles, there are more somewhere. They tend to hide. These are mostly bone. That one's antler. Yes, both of those are bone. And those work really nicely on fairly coarse things. And in this little basket, which is a burdock and bramble one, there are some useful flints, ones that I could use for scraping things or just as cutting edges or for piercing. There's always flints kicking around in my gear. The trick is not to have so many of them that everything weighs a ton. And of course, I don't want to cut myself when I put my hand into the basket. So into that as well can go some pins. These are blackthorn pins. So they're made from the thorns of the bush that you get sloes from. You can make needles from these as well. You can see how long those are. Sometimes they're shorter, sometimes they're longer. They work really well. I quite often use these for later period things to pin headrails into place as well. But pins, well, you never know when you're going to need a pin. Those can tuck into there. Now what else have I got in little baskets? So this one has little bits of quite finely processed nettle in it, and also a little tiny bone comb, which is quite useful for teasing things out. I think there's a lid that fits it. Does that one go with that? Well, that's not exactly right. That one probably goes with that, so let's try that. So anyway, things in baskets means they don't spill out. Now what's in this one? Oh no, these look like needle blanks and needles in process. So some of these are slips. Some of these are slips of antler, some of them are little slivers of bone, there's a wooden one. Those are all needles are partly made. So I think those can go into this little basket, which has some gauge sticks that I use when I'm doing netting. So if those bits go in there as well, then that's ready to be worked on if a moment or opportunity. What else have I got that would stand upright in there? Oh, those would. Awls. So that is a leg bone. What was that one from? It's quite big, isn't it? I've got a feeling that one might have been pig. I'm not 100% sure. I'm not really an osteo person. That's a really heavy awl. It's quite good for working basketry things, but that can stand in there as well, as can this smaller one, which is a sheep cannon bone. I use this one a lot. It might look quite big, but it sits in the hand really nicely and it's strong. So if I need to wiggle holes into things or lever open bits of basketry, that's one of my favourite and most used tools. They don't have to look fancy to be really worthwhile. So other things that can go in there, that's a blank of a spatula that hasn't been finished yet. That's also a useful pokey bone stick, and that is going to be another awl at some point. That's been split open but not worked, so that, I think that can just tuck into the side. All right, okay, so I think we want some other pretty things in there next. This was my favourite bone netting shuttle. It's had a little bit of an accident. Doesn't stop it being useful though. One day I will remake it. I quite often use a plain wooden one for day-to-day functional nets, but there is something lovely about highly polished bone tools. I don't want that to break any further, so we'll tuck that in where it's safe. And then there are a couple of spindles. Now this one's got a little clay whirl and a very thin stick, works fine. This one is a U-wood stick. Now you could put a whirl on it, but actually it works quite well by itself without anything extra on it, particularly once there's a little bit of yarn built up onto it. Also makes quite a good hairpin, so it's always a handy thing to have in your kit, is a way of keeping your hair under control. So those can go there. All right, things for hitting things with. Small Antler Beam, and there should be, there it is, a small friendly rock. I quite often need to tap away at things like sinew or fibres to break them down. A couple of convenient whacking sticks are very handy. Tuck those in there. What have we got in this basket? I've had this since I was a small child. It's been quite abused over the years. Oh, I know. That's got a little bit of silk and a little bit of highly processed nettle in it, which I use for comparisons. They're really there to show people just how fine fibres can get. So it's not something that I use in anger a great deal, but it's a nice thing to have in my sewing basket. All right, that's starting to look quite nice. Okay, we've got a little basket here. This is a tiny little pine needle basket sewn together with nettle cordage, and in there is a little bit of oxtail, I think, with a bit of nettle cordage on it. That looks like beeswax. It's not, it's actually pine resin. I sometimes use that for sort of hard waxing of things, and to be honest, beeswax is better. There should be a lump of that here somewhere, but again, quite nice comparison. And some more bone antler, that was bone again, loops for making more belts. Will that go into the bottom without getting totally crushed? Wiggle, in you go. Excellent. Right, we found that little comb earlier. This is a little wooden one. That's great for all sorts of things. I could use up my crazy hair. I'm much more likely to use it to untangle fibres. It's a useful tool. And let's have a nice little fat goddess to go in the corner because we need all the help we can get. And what else have we got? Oh, that's a nice weaving shuttle. That one I think is in U. It's a lovely tactile shape. It's quite wide, this one. It's one that Gareth made me a couple of years ago. But I find it's actually a really nice scale for beating into backstrap weaving. And the slight wiggly edge means it's useful for picking things up. So they don't all have to be regular in size and shape. And that's a little bit of antler with a hole through it. Now that's quite useful for some cordage techniques where you need something that you can get a bit of leverage on or to pull a cord through to grade it. There are some much bigger holed ones known from prehistory that are thought to be something to do with cordage making. So that gets used for quite a few different things. But again, nice object to have in my kit. And what else can go in there? I've got some spare bones. That is deer, that is goose. Now I actually use these as bars in a very, very proto-experimental backstrap loom sometimes, just to show people it doesn't have to be done with sticks. So I think those can go in as well. A few finishing touches, another piece of backstrap sinew, because you don't always sew with plant fibres. A little sprang bag full of bits of cordage, because string is a very important thing. And then I will probably tuck some of those part finished projects that we were looking at, or those finished ones, in round the corners, partly as padding, but also so that they're available when I'm showing people things. So that's my sewing basket, little bit tidier again. So I've nearly got this straight. I found a couple more things to go in here. One is a looped basket of fibres. Those are all different nettle fibres, but that can live in the corner there. And my couple of baskets in progress in line bast can also live in there, which means my sewing basket can sit on top, and if I tuck that in with a bit of fabric, and this is a nice bit of hand spun and hand woven cloth, which is very similar to prehistoric cloths, I can make that all tidy and cosy. And the cat has wandered off, but when he comes back he's still got a comfy space to sit, and that is a great deal better. It's still messy. A lot of you are going to be tidier than me. I don't care. I love my clobber.